Hey, good afternoon and welcome to the February 5th edition of Stock Talk. My name is Kristen Bouchard-Teasdale, Livestock and Forage Extension Specialist out of the Beausejour office, and I will be your host today. We've got a full agenda for you. We're going to start off with some quick programming updates, followed by a presentation from Alison Sass, our meteorology specialist, with Manitoba Agriculture, titled Weather Whiplash, A Season of Extremes. And then we'll do a quick review of the Manitoba Pasture Forage and Water Survey results from 2024 and 2025. And we'll round out the webinar with a Chewing the Cud, a livestock and forage Q&A session with our provincial beef specialist, Dr. Juanita Kopp. So the Manitoba Ag Forage and Livestock team is conducting a winter feed and water survey. Those choosing to participate submit a forage sample for basic testing, the 2FF package using wet chemistry with central testing labs at a cost of $71. They will then receive a complimentary trace mineral analysis of the forage sample. So we'd be looking at getting the trace minerals such as copper, manganese, zinc, and we've actually got a sulfur add-on in there too, as well as a complementary analysis of their primary winter water source, which will be conducted at ALS. If you'd like to participate, please give a call to our 1-800 number on the screen up there. Limited spots in each region are available. Next up, the codes of practice. Beef cattle codes of practice have received a bit of an update. The codes of practice serve as our national understanding of an on-farm animal care requirement and recommended practices. They are an important point of reference for regulations, extension tools, and the foundation for animal care assessments. The code is designed to support continuous improvement in animal welfare while remaining practical, science-based, and aligned with public expectations for responsible livestock care. It is regularly reviewed and updated through a consensus-based process involving a broad range of stakeholders, including producers, veterinarians, transporters, processors, retailers, government researchers, and animal welfare representatives. Beef producers from both the cow-calf and feeding sectors across Canada are directly involved in this process. But because they can't ask everyone to sit at the table, an updated draft of the code will be released for a 60-day public comment period beginning March 2nd, 2026. Producer feedback is critical during this stage, and it helps to ensure the final code reflects practical, regionally relevant, and sustainable management practices across the Canadian beef industry. So if you've got a spare moment, scan the QR code there that is on the page, and you'll be able to take a look at the updated code and leave some comments. As cover crop use in Ontario and the prairies continues to evolve, a survey is being launched to capture insights into that change. It is a collaborative project led by researchers from the University of Manitoba and Manitoba Agriculture alongside the Ontario Cover Crop Steering Committee, which aims to build on the 2020 survey and learn more about the adoption practices, benefits, and challenges of cover crops as reported by farms and their advisors. This year's survey is open to all farm types and sizes and those who advise farms across Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. The survey can be accessed by scanning the QR code on the screen, and it is open until March 31st, 2025. And now, without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Alison Sass. I think before Alison gets started, I have to apologize to everybody because I think I jinxed us on the last webinar. I skipped over that how to manage cattle during extreme cold slide, and it seemed like the next day the deep freeze was upon us. So I hope everybody made it through that cold weather. And if there are any positives that came out of it, it's that we know which watering bowls we're going to have to look into or focus on a little bit in the summertime. Manitoba Merv also let us down this week when he saw his shadow and predicted 6 more weeks of winter. So, Allison, I hope that you can provide us with um, a more favorable information.
Well, we'll see. Might be a little bit better than a groundhog, but not necessarily by much. So, thanks for that introduction, Kristen. Today, I'm just going to give a brief summary about what we saw during the last growing season and what we're seeing now and kind of what some of the predictions are for the future. So as Christian mentioned, I'm Alison. I'm the Ag Meteorology Specialist with Manitoba Agriculture, and my main job with the Ag Meteorology program is to help manage the operations, the data management, and the extension for the Ag Weather program. So I'll give you a little bit of a summary about the Manitoba Ag Weather Network. Most of the data that I'm going to be showing today is from our network information. Then I'll follow that with a growing season summary, the current conditions, and some of the spring forecasts. And then I'll round the presentation out with some information on how you can access the data throughout the year. So the Manitoba Agriculture Weather Program operates 120 professional grade weather stations across Agro-Manitoba. This is a view of one of our common stations. They basically all look the same. Each station measures temperature, relative humidity, wind speed, wind direction, pressure, precipitation year-round, solar radiation, soil moisture, and soil temperature. And those soil variables are measured at the 5, 20, 50, and 100 centimeter depths. The installations of our current design of the programs began in 2005. And we've continued growing since. So some of our stations are almost 20 years old now, which is a really unique thing with weather networks in that it's rare to have a network run that long, especially an on-farm network. So we've got a really good historical data set. All of our stations meet World Meteorological Organization standards in terms of their instrumentation, the installation, and our ongoing maintenance. So all of our stations are visited at least twice a year, so once in the spring and once in the fall, as well as we perform in-depth calibrations of our stations every 3 years. We have 2 full-time field technologists that take care of our weather stations. So kudos to them for keeping our network up and running. And the goal of our network is to provide a regional perspective. So we don't necessarily provide minute individual site-by-site readings. The whole goal is to provide a mesonet view. And the best spacing for weather stations as a mesonet is about every 20 to 30 kilometers, there should be a weather station. So when we combine the density of our weather network, along with the Environment and Climate Change Canada stations within Agro-Manitoba, we do have that spacing in most regions. So I'll move on to our growing season summary. So we'll start with looking at the precipitation that we saw early in the growing season. So these 2 maps show the total accumulated precipitation from May 1st to June 1st. That's the map on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side is a comparison to normal. So based on a 30-year average, how did the precipitation from May 1st to June 1st compare to that 30-year average? As you can see, rainfall for most regions were quite a bit below the 30-year average. So the Northwest, Interlake, and Eastern regions were well below 50% of normal accumulation. And there was just a few pockets in the Southwest corner that were near or above normal precipitations. So this low precipitation was the cause and a contributor, combined with some high wind events, to some of the major wildfires that we saw early in the growing season, especially in the eastern and northwest regions, where we had a earlier than normal fire season, and it was extreme. It caused a lot of evacuations for prolonged periods of time, a lot of damage, and unfortunately, we lost some lives as part of those wildfires as well. how does this compare to previous years? So what we've been seeing a lot lately is a lot of variability from year to year. So this is just a snapshot to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. So this is a map that I created in 2024 from covering the time period of May 1st to June 23rd, 2024. And all early spring, all the questions I answered that year were about how bad a drought was going to be. And this is what we were hit with early in the growing season. And when we compare that to 2025, you can see drastically different. We really can't predict one year from the next, relying on previous data, that's for sure. So by mid-June 2025, we were seeing those drier than normal conditions prevail through most of the province, with a couple of exceptions in the southwest. And that interlake area was continued to be quite dry. So as we look at the season progression of the precipitation compared to the 30-year average, you can see that it was variable throughout. Conditions did improve in most regions. Oops, sorry about that. I skipped ahead. By the end of October, with the exception of the Interlake, which had far below normal precipitation throughout the growing season, which really caused a lot of concerns. There was impacts to our forage quality, and there was a lot of concerns in that area. One thing that did help was early in the growing season, we did have adequate soil moisture in most regions for that early May to June time that had accumulated throughout the winter and going into the fall. So that provided adequate soil moisture for early seeding and for some of that early crop growth. So we didn't see a lot of the impacts of the dry conditions in some areas until later on in the growing season. I'll provide the caveat with these maps as well. So I produce these on a weekly basis during the growing season. But one thing that's not captured in these maps, especially with the one that we're looking at, which covers all the way from May to October, is the timing of the precipitation and the intensity of the rainfall. So sometimes those things get lost as we average through a whole growing season. So I'll show you kind of a month by month perspective and kind of split it down by region. So drilling down, we have each region is a separate color. We've got the central region blue, the eastern region green, Interlake is yellow, the northwest region is purple, and the southwest region is yellow. So as we saw in the maps, April and May were below normal in all but the southwest regions by quite a bit. So we're seeing the eastern and the Interlake regions below 50%. So anything on this graph under 100 is below normal. Anything below 100 is above normal, comparing to that 30-year average. We saw that same trend continuing through June and July, which became concerning as our crops began to grow and that water demand became higher. We really started to need that precipitation. In August, however, we did see a slight increase in precipitation. We saw some bigger precipitation events, but it wasn't enough necessarily to bring us back to those normal values for the whole growing season. And some of the precipitation came a little bit too late for some crops. September, again, we saw an increase. It was above normal precipitation for the month of September in most regions, except again for the Interlake, which saw continued below normal precipitation. And then we had quite a wet October, so quite a bit of precipitation in October. Again, might have been quite a bit late for crops and slightly interfered with some harvest activities as well, but a bit promising in terms of our soil moisture going into the fall. So just to see how this compares from year to year, I chose our station in Arborg to see how the variation from year to year has occurred. Um, so each line on this graph represents a different year. So I have 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, all the way to 2025. And that dark black line in the center is the 30-year average. So this is the precipitation accumulation from May 1st to October 30th, 31st throughout each of those years. And you can see that this dark red line representing 2025 was one of the lowest years, that one of the lowest precipitation accumulations that we've had in quite a few years, especially at this station. I will say that this wasn't the trend at all of our stations. So for many areas, we saw that 2023 was actually quite a bit drier than 2025. But I chose the Arborg area just to kind of accentuate some of those challenging conditions that we were seeing in the Interlake throughout the season. So these are a few images from the Canadian Drought Monitor that's published by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. They publish these maps each month, and they derive these from many meteorological, hydrological, live and modeled inputs. There's a farmer survey as well that they send out, so you can actually submit what you're seeing on your farm to help them assess some of the impacts that they're seeing in regards to agriculture. So in July, you can see that the far south region was moderately dry. And we are seeing those extreme drought, that red area in the Interlake, parts of the Northwest region throughout the month of July. Those conditions continued for the most part into August. We saw a little bit of improvement in the southern regions as they had a little bit of precipitation. So we saw a bit of a movement towards abnormally dry versus moderately dry, but those extreme drought conditions again persisted in the Interlake region. And by September, we saw further improvement. So again, on that previous graph, we saw that we had quite a bit of rain in some areas in September, which helped improve some of those drought intensity categorizations. But again, still those dry conditions up in the Interlake. So we'll move on to take a quick look at the temperatures that we saw month by month as well. So April started off, we were just slightly above normal in most regions, so about half a degree above normal for the month of April. And then, oops, we had a really abnormally warm May, so extremely high temperatures for that time of year. That also contributed to some of those wildfire conditions as well. And actually, the seasonal high for most of our weather stations were recorded in May. So our station in Brunkild recorded the highest temperature of the season from our whole network on May 12th, and it had a temperature of 39.9 degrees Celsius. So really hot for May. June and July, however, were very close to normal. July actually had temperatures slightly below normal, which provided a little bit of relief during that time of dryness. So where we had those times of below normal precipitation, it was almost a relief to have cooler temperatures so that our crops weren't quite as stressed. Temperatures continued to be near normal or slightly above for August, and then we were greeted with more above normal temperatures for both September, and we had an abnormally warm October as well. And this is illustrated as well in our growing degree day map. So this is how we started the season. This is May. So you can see all that dark red. We had well over 125% of our normal accumulated growing degree days. And as we continued through the growing season, those temperatures approached normal as we moved into August. You could see the maps are turning a little bit yellow and then back by the end of October, we're seeing those above normal temperatures return. In terms of frost, we had a kind of a short-lived frost on September 7th in a few pocketed areas, but especially the Interlake. And then our more widespread frost was seen on October 7th, with temperatures below -2 for much of the western part of the province. Our lowest temperature that day was -10. So it goes to show as well, I'll mention, when we're looking at those monthly temperatures, it doesn't necessarily mean that every day was above normal. It just means that on average, for the whole region, we saw above normal temperatures. Because again, when you see a -10 in the beginning of October, doesn't quite match sometimes. But yeah, it's the averages that we're looking at in terms of those graphs. I like to include some of the season extremes that we saw. So we had our highest monthly rain in Portage la Prairie in August. They had almost 200 millimeters of rain. Our highest hourly rainfall was at our Birch River station. They received almost 75 millimeters on July 30th. We had 3 stations that had 21 days without precipitation. And our highest daily rain was up in the northwest at our Ethelbert station. Another thing I'll point out that I like to mention as well is what we've been seeing a lot of lately is much more variable rainfall. So we're not seeing those same widespread, the whole province gets a nice gentle rain throughout the 2 days. We're seeing much more isolated storms. And when I mentioned that our network provides a regional perspective, that's something to keep in mind when looking at our data. So things like precipitation can vary a lot over a very short area. So I have a couple of illustrations on that. So the first picture I have here is a map of the Portage la Prairie region. And on August 20th, we had an extreme rainfall event in that area. And there's 4 weather stations within that region. So the Manitoba Agriculture Weather Station is this blue number. We recorded 111 millimeters at our weather station. The environment, we had 2 CocoRAS observers. So those are volunteer precipitation stations. They recorded 101 and 100 millimeters. So we have about a 10 millimeter difference even over this area, which would probably be maybe 5 kilometers. And then down here, this is the Environment and Climate Change Canada station near Portage. And they only recorded 92.8 millimeters. And this whole area, so the distance from our station to the Environment and Climate Change Canada station is only 8 kilometers. And that's a pretty significant difference in the rainfall that we're seeing. Another illustration of that is in the city of Winnipeg. They have a weather network or a rainfall weather network as well. And I believe this was on the same day. So the same big storm rolled through Winnipeg as well. And there's a 60 millimeter difference in the observations that they saw in the southwest corner of the city versus the northwest corner, this is about a 15 kilometer as the crow flies distance. And there's a 60 millimeter difference. So this just shows what kind of extreme events can really add to the variability, even over a given field or two on a given farm. Some of the other major rainfalls we had were over September 11th and 12th in the eastern region. We saw some overland flooding in Steinbach. And then we also had a major event later on in September around the 14th to 16th, which really seemed to hit the northwest. In terms of some extreme temperatures, again, looking at this illustration, you can see that a lot of our warmest temperatures were in May. So again, there's that Brunkild station, which recorded 40 degrees on May 12th. Our highest temperature range was on May 4th in Arborg, and they saw a 29.9 degree temperature change. So it was zero point 0.2 degrees was the low, and 30 degrees was the high that day. Our shortest frost-free period was at Narcisse, and our longest one was in the Gardenton and Winkler areas. In terms of soil moisture, so prior to freeze up, we take soil moisture readings at our weather station as an indication of the soil moisture conditions we might see in the spring. So soil moisture doesn't change during the winter very much because the soil and the moisture is frozen. So it gives us an indication what we might expect in the spring, keeping in mind that winter precipitation, both the amount and the type. So if we're getting a lot of rain in the spring or rain in the fall, or heavy snow versus dry snow, as well as the speed and timing of the melt will also play a huge role in what we're going to see in the spring. But this kind of gives us a little indication of what we might see. So at the 0 to 30 centimeter depths, we saw pretty good soil moisture throughout the province. There are a couple of pockets that show drier conditions. Some of that is just because our stations are installed in a very well-drained area. But we are seeing a little bit drier conditions in the Interlake. So we're really hoping for some decent winter precipitation and probably a nice slow melt in that region so that we're giving that moisture some time to infiltrate into the soil. And we're seeing the same trends at the 0 to 120 centimeter depths as well. So 80 to 100% of the available water holding capacity in most regions, with the exception of the Interlake and that part of the Northwest region around Lake Manitoba. So currently we're seeing, again, below normal precipitation conditions continuing through so far this off season. So this is from November 1st to February 1st. Especially in the southern region, we're seeing below 70% of normal precipitation. But it doesn't take much to move that bar up so that we're closer to normal. And we're still pretty early in the off season. And again, this has been mostly dry winter snow. And one thing I will also mention as well is winter precipitation is extremely difficult to measure, especially at our weather stations. So all of our stations are installed way out wide in the open area, which is great for agriculture, but terrible for trying to catch dry snow in windy conditions. So, for example, our Deloraine station reported 116 kilometer per hour winds during one of our snowstorms. So chances are good that we missed a lot of that snow falling into the gauge. So take these with a grain of salt as well. And then in terms of the mean temperature difference, due to the recent cold snap, we're seeing slightly below normal temperature differences over the course of the whole off season. So again, this is the average for the whole season. We're about 0 to 1 degree below average for the majority of the province. In terms of spring forecasts, so these are from Environment and Climate Change Canada data, and these are probabilistic forecasts. So that bright yellow is showing a 40 to 50 to, and then that orange region is 50 to 60% a probability that temperatures will be above normal for the months of February, March, and April. Again, this is a probability that temperatures might be slightly above normal. It doesn't indicate how much above normal. It doesn't indicate how many days above normal it's going to be. It's just on average, there's a chance that temperatures might be above normal. And in terms of precipitation, there's not really an indication of any probability of it being above or below zero. So anywhere there's no color indicates there's equal probability that precipitation over the next 3 months will be above normal, below normal, or normal. So there's a 33% chance of each, except for that far southwest corner, which there's a slight chance that precipitation might be higher than normal over the 3 months. So I'll round my presentation out by just giving a little bit more information on our weather network. So this is our layout of our network. So all those orange dots are Manitoba Ag Weather stations. And you can access any of the data from those stations for free on our website. There's a few different ways to do that. So one way is through our interactive station map. So even if you Google Manitoba agriculture weather, it'll take you to this map. And we have a series of tabs at the top of the page, and you simply have to click on one of those tabs, and the map will change to show you the live regional conditions. These are all, again, the weather stations, and as you zoom in or zoom out, you can view the live information at those stations. So here I've chosen air temperature. I've zoomed in a little bit so I can see the live air temperature at all of our stations. These are updated hourly throughout the year, and we update all of the variables. If you click on any of those dots, it'll take you to the summary page for that weather station. These pages are updated every 15 minutes during the growing season, so from May 1st to November 1st, and they're updated hourly through the winter. And it gives you basically the whole summary of all of the conditions at that particular site. And then we have a summary of the previous day at the bottom of the page. If you want to save this on your phone, what you can do is navigate to the live station that you would like and save it to your homepage or to your desktop on your phone. And then it kind of operates like an app. So you just have to click on it and it'll automatically open to the station you chose. We also have regional summaries. So if you farm over a wide region or you want to see what's happening in more than just one location, you can navigate to our weather conditions and reports page and choose on one of the condition summaries. And it'll give you an hourly update from all of our weather stations of all the basic parameters organized by region. Again, these are updated hourly throughout the year. And we also produce weekly maps and reports. So a lot of those maps that I showed today, I produce on a weekly basis on Mondays, and they're usually published to our website by Monday evening or Tuesday. And they're also part of the crop report during the growing season. And we produce a crop weather report as well. So that's actually all of the values for the past week and the variations of the growing degree days, corn heat units, and rainfall from normal. During the winter, we do produce these maps as well. It's just precipitation maps and a temperature map. We don't do, of course, the growing degree days or corn heat units during the off season. So with that, I'd like to thank the rest of our Met team, including our field staff, our data technologist, Mark, my manager, Colleen, as well as if there's any landowners on the call that help to host our weather stations. Our network wouldn't exist without the cooperation of those landowners as well. So a big thank you to them. For more information, you can email our general agriculture email address, or you can email myself. My address is on the screen there, as well as if you have any historical data requests as well. We do have a treasure trove of historical data, but we only address those by request right now. So feel free to send me a message, or again, the general agriculture email will send your request on to me. So if there's time for questions, I'd be happy to answer, or I will also stay on till the end of the session as well if anything should come up.
For sure. I think if anyone has a question for Alison, can pop it into the chat there. Thank you so much for your presentation. You guys are you're a very busy team. And it's just, I think we don't necessarily realize all of the resources that you're putting together for us and that are available on the website. I find them really handy, and yeah, I hope folks navigate there in the future over the summer and the growing season and check it all out. Okay, so I am going to share my screen. Oh, there. Okay. Are you seeing what I'm hoping you're seeing?
Looks good.
Looks good. All right. Okay, so if there's no questions,
Yeah, I don't see any questions in
any
the
questions? Okay, I think we're gonna keep on motoring. In the interest of time, I'm going to zip through this as quickly as I can. And so what I've got for you here today is some information on the Manitoba Pasture Forage and Water Survey that the Forage and Livestock team conducted in 2024 and 2025. So in 2024 and 2025, Manitoba Agriculture conducted a pasture forage survey with producers across Manitoba to assess the feed quality and mineral status of the sampled forages. In 2024, 44 pastures were sampled between late August and mid-September, and in 2025, 43 pastures were sampled, but this time between late June and mid-July. Pastures sampled represented continuous, stockpiled, and rotational grazing management systems. Forage quality varied, ranging from stockpiled forage to young regrowth, as well as tame, native, and grass legume mixtures. Sampling pastures at different points in the growing season can reveal meaningful differences in forage quality that are important for cattle producers to consider when making grazing and supplementation decisions. And so we decided to collect our samples at different points within the growing season over the 2 years of sampling. In late June, most cool season grasses and legumes are in vegetative or early reproductive stages. And what we expected at this time was for forage quality in general to be quite high. This is because our plant crude protein levels are generally high, which support strong animal performance. Digestibility and energy are higher due to a greater proportion of leaves and less stem material in the plant. Fiber levels are lower, allowing for higher intake. And mineral concentrations are typically more adequate, in particular, calcium and phosphorus. Pastures that are sampled in late June, usually reflect a forage that's capable of meeting our animals' nutritional requirements with very, minimal supplementation, particularly our animals with higher requirements, such as our growing calves and lactating cows. By late August, however, many of our forages have matured or they've entered a reproductive or senescent stages, especially if they haven't been grazed or clipped earlier. And quality at this time is often reduced, and producers may see lower crude protein, which would fall potentially below our grazing animals' requirements. Reduced digestibility and energy as stem content in the plant increases and lignification progresses. Higher fiber levels in the plant, which could limit intake, declining mineral availability, particularly phosphorus and sometimes trace minerals, and greater variability in quality depending on moisture conditions, regrowth from earlier, and the different species that are making up the pasture. We also wanted to pay particular attention to the effect of pasture type on forage quality. With your native grass pastures, we expected the forages to be of more moderate quality. So they tend to have a lower peak performance than improved pastures. However, they're more drought tolerant and their quality tends to be more stable in dry, hot conditions, which is a particularly important, in locations like the Interlake last year. Our tame pastures typically have a high quality in the spring, but it drops rather quickly after heading. They produce reliable yields that are responsive to fertilizer, but they're often low in trace minerals. And our grass legume pastures tend to be the highest in quality, due in part to their protein content. Higher intakes, milk production, and calf gains are often associated with this pasture type. However, bloat management may be required depending on the type and proportion of legumes that you have in the pasture mix. Truthfully, what we were most interested in was the trace mineral concentration of the pastures we were sampling. Trace minerals are required in really small amounts, yet deficiencies can quietly limit production long before obvious symptoms appear. Trace minerals such as copper, zinc, and manganese play very important roles in growth and feed efficiency, immune function and disease resistance, reproduction and fertility, as well as hair coat and overall performance. Trace mineral levels in pasture forages are highly variable and unpredictable, even within the same field and year. However, we do know that they are influenced by soil moisture levels, plant species, as different plants accumulate minerals differently, time of growing season, plant maturity, as well as environmental conditions. So, what did we find? Well, in 2024, when we sampled in late August, the average dry matter content for all of our pastures was 39.2%, with crude protein at 11.1 and energy levels at 59%. In 2025, when we sampled earlier in the growing season, our average dry matter content for all pastures was lower, so 33.6%, which was expected, with crude protein at 14% and TDN at 62.7. So both of those were elevated and what we were predicting would happen. Our grasses and legumes in vegetative or early reproductive stages were highest in quality, while those pastures that had stockpiled mature forages tended to be the lowest. Okay. In this slide, we're going to look at the energy content of some of the forages that we sampled. And in the middle of the slide, the BCRC has just done some fabulous work in terms of their extension, and they've put together a really great infographic here that I like to use. Sorry, I'm using two of my computer screens here and I'm mixing myself up. And what it does is it illustrates the different phases that the cow goes through in her annual production cycle. And with each phase, what it does is it identifies the different life events that she's experiencing. So, for example, in phase one, she's given birth and she's experiencing that postpartum interval as she's also providing milk to her calf. And so it's letting us know that her crude protein and her energy requirements in this phase one, which lasts between day 0, so the day she gives birth, to day 82 post-birth, is a crude protein requirement of 11% and energy at 65. This is going to extend through into her phase 2, those high nutrient requirements. So protein at 11% and TDN at 65. So if we have a March 15th calving date, we can expect that phase 1 and phase 2 requirements are going to extend through until September 30th. So it's sometimes, I don't think we realize that those requirements are that high for such an extended period of time. And in looking in some of these pasture results in 2024, when we sampled in late August, beginning of fall, only 16% of our sampled pastures at that time were able to meet a TDN requirement of 65%. In 2025, pardon me, we saw an increase in the number of pastures that were able to meet those requirements. 26% of them did meet that requirement of 65. And I was really nitpicky here. If you didn't hit 65% on the nose, you weren't included in this percentage. But cattle don't eat decimal points. And if we take a look at the average values, if I can get my mouse to mouse over here and work, in 2025, a lot of those pastures really did come close, right? We were averaging out in the low 60s, 63.4% for the grass legume. And if we look at some of the ranges that we were experiencing, we were sampling as high as 72%, which actually seems crazy to me on a native grass pasture. But in some circumstances, some pastures were as low as 55%. And I think knowing that would be beneficial because our animals may require some additional supplementation if that is the case. Another similar slide, this one highlighting the protein content of the different samples. In 2024, so again in that fall kind of stage of sampling, 36% of our sampled pastures met a crude protein requirement of 11%. In 2025, we saw quite a big change. So in those early growing season conditions, 63% of our pastures met a crude protein requirement of 11%. All but one of our grass legume pastures were capable of meeting that 11% crude protein requirement in 2025. So there we can see for sure the benefits of incorporating legumes in our forage stands. If we look at our calcium and phosphorus, what I've done here is the top graph is where I've got what the animal's requirements are laid out, and the bottom chart is consistently throughout the presentation going to be what we found. And what I've done, these are pretty busy, I apologize, but I wanted to put as much information as I could in here. The top numbers in each of these charts here, say if we look at average calcium 0.44 in our native grass pastures, that would be the average percentage that we saw over 13 samples. And then here's the range of calcium that we saw, across those 13 native grass pastures that were sampled. So in 2025, 95% of our pastures met our grazing cattle's highest calcium requirements, but only 26% of pastures met their highest phosphorus requirements. In 2024, we saw something similar in terms of calcium. 97% of all pastures sampled met the cattle's highest calcium requirements, whereas only 16% were able to meet their highest phosphorus requirements. So 37 out of 44 pasture sampled, did not actually meet their phos requirements. These findings aren't shocking, as phosphorus is often the first limiting mineral in forages, particularly later in the grazing system. It's important to note that animals that are deficient in phosphorus, they may experience reduced appetites and weight gain, poor reproductive performance, reduced conception rates, delayed puberty in heifers, and in very, very extreme cases, we can see some bone weaknesses and long-term deficiencies. So I think what's interesting about this data is right out of the gates, our forage results are indicating that mineral supplementation on pasture, just from this macro calcium and phosphorus requirement, that it is important. Okay, moving on to sulfur, why it matters. In ruminant animals, the rumen microbes, they require sulfur to synthesize essential amino acids and microbial proteins. So they require it really for their own growth. And as these microbes grow and die, they slough off further into the animal's digestive system where they're actually absorbed, and they are one of the primary sources of protein in our ruminant animals. So we need the sulfur for the bug health. And in having healthy bugs, this also is supporting fiber digestion and overall rumen function. If we are deficient in phosphorus, what we're going to notice then would be reduced forage digestion and lower feed efficiency. So the recommended amount or requirement of phosphorus in cattle diets is typically 0.15%. However, if we shoot over that, too much of a good thing becomes problematic, particularly in terms of sulfur. When we have too much sulfur within our diet, we tend to see interferences with copper and selenium absorption and utilization. And if that happens, some of our animals will exhibit symptoms such as reduced reproductive efficiency. We see overall poor performance, as well as depressed immunity. If we have animals that have ingested particularly high levels of sulfur, so if we're reaching close to those maximum amounts here that are illustrated on the side of the slide, where our animals are at risk of developing a neurological disease called polioencephalomalacia. And what that one does is it actually causes damage to brain tissue, and in most extreme cases can cause death of animals. So that is certainly something we want to avoid. Our maximum tolerable dietary concentration of sulfur, it it is dependent on the animal's diet. So the highest level for animals that are fed high concentrate diets is 0.3%. And that's because a high concentrate or a high grain diet tends to um, lead to a more acidic rumen. And when we have an acidic rumen, it favors the growth of microbes that tend to produce or convert the sulfur into hydrogen sulfide, which is the compound that is problematic and leads to polio. If we're feeding a higher forage diet, so a ration that's containing at least 40% forage, we're able to get away with a little bit of a higher sulfur level in the diet, about 0.5%. So, what we saw was that approximately 80% of all of our pastures sampled met or exceeded our grazing cows' sulfur requirements. I'm afraid we only have data for 2025. It was missed off of our 2024 analysis request, but we can see that in many cases we have sufficient sulfur on pasture. Okay, moving on, we'll take a peek at copper, which is absolutely coming up more often in conversation when we're talking about beef cattle, and it's because copper serves a lot of very important functions. It supports immune function and disease resistance. It's essential for reproduction, in particular cycling, consumption, and embryo survival. It's involved in iron metabolism and red blood cell formation, and it's needed for hair pigmentation and coat quality. So what we might notice if we are deficient in copper in our herds, the easiest and I think the most notable sign is a faded or a washed out hair coat, especially in our black animals. They tend to turn red. So it's not that they're getting too much sun necessarily, it's that they could be copper deficient. We'll also see reduced conception, more open cows, increased sickness and poor vaccine response, as well as slower growth in our calves. So the recommended concentration of copper in beef cattle diets is 10 milligrams per kilogram of diet dry matter, or 10 parts per million. And our requirements of copper can actually vary anywhere from 4 to more than 15 parts per million. And this depends largely on the concentration of dietary molybdenum, and as I mentioned previously, sulfur, and to a more limited extent, iron and sometimes zinc. So these three minerals, when they are present in certain concentrations, they actually have an antagonistic effect on copper. And so the copper that is consumed by the animal is not actually available for use by it because they form compounds that bind up with the copper and make it unavailable. So in most situations, copper requirements for ruminants are greatly increased by molybdenum and sulfur in excess of 2 milligrams of molybdenum per kilogram of dietary dry matter and 0.25% sulfur. Copper requirements can also be affected by factors such as breed. And I thought a little interesting note here was that Simmental and Charolais cattle, they tend to be more susceptible to copper deficiencies than Angus. So what did we find? I suppose this didn't come as too much of a surprise. None of our pasture samples were able to reach that 10 part per million mark for copper in 2024. And in 2025, only one pasture sample contained 10 milligrams per kilogram or parts per million of copper. So irregardless of whether it was a native grass pasture, tame, or grass legume, our averages are indicating that we are not quite meeting that 10 part per million mark, and that copper supplementation on pasture is important. Moving on to manganese. This one is important for reproductive performance. It's essential for skeletal development as it's concentrated in our bones, especially in calves, and it's involved in enzyme systems and energy metabolism. So, what producers might notice if their animals are deficient in copper, or sorry, manganese, is a silent heat and poor conception, potentially increased embryonic losses, and weak or poorly developed calves at birth in very severe cases. In 2024, 70% of our pasture sampled met the cow's highest manganese requirement. However, in 2025, our numbers were noticeably lower. So in many cases, on average here, really, when we're looking across the board, um, in 2025, we were less likely to meet our cattle's manganese requirements. This could in part have been influenced by the environmental conditions. So in very dry soils, um, less water is available for plants to take up nutrients, including manganese. And under very, very dry conditions, manganese in the soil, it it converts to a form that is less available for plants to uptake and to absorb. And so I think we were seeing some of that in our results. For molybdenum is required. It's a component of certain enzymes that are involved in sulfur metabolism, nitrogen metabolism, and detoxification processes in the body. If we have too much molybdenum, often what we see are some of the signs that are associated with copper deficiency, because molybdenum has that antagonistic effect on the copper. But what we might also notice is diarrhea, as well as stiffness and reduced appetite and weight gain. When you look in the NRC, which is the book that outlines really what animals' nutritional requirements are, there are no requirements for molybdenum that are established. However, it does indicate that the maximum tolerable level of molybdenum for cattle has been estimated at between 5 and 10 milligrams of molybdenum per kilogram of dietary dry matter. But I want to just remind everybody that 1 to 2 milligrams per kilogram of dry matter is considered normal when accounting for moly's effect on copper absorption. So, they can certainly tolerate higher than that 1 to 2 parts per million, but anything above that is going to have a negative effect on the animal's ability to utilize copper. And when we look at our samples, on average, we are coming in at 2 parts per million of moly or higher. In some really extreme cases, we had some readings of 7.4 and 10 parts per million. And so certainly folks that find themselves in this situation are definitely going to want to consider, um, you know, mineral supplementation or ways of making sure that we're able to overcome those antagonistic effects on copper. In zinc, this zinc is another really important trace mineral. It is critical for immune response and wound healing. It's important for hoof integrity and skin health. It supports reproductive hormone function, and it plays a really strong role in the health of our rumen linings. And what you might notice if your animals are deficient in zinc is an increased incidence of foot problems, rough hair coats, and skin lesions, poor immune response, especially in stressed calves, and reduced feed intake, feed efficiency, and growth, and decreased reproductive performance. Sorry, I'm just looking at my clock and I'm realizing that I'm out of time here. So in 2024, 9% of our pasture sampled met the grazing cow's zinc requirement. In 2025, only 27% sampled met her grazing or her zinc requirement. So across the board, we were, quite short on zinc. So it's just another one that we want to make sure that we're supplementing on pasture. So I think to wrap it up, we might not get to the water this time. And you know what? That's okay. I think what we could do is we could add it, we can tack it on to our webinar potentially next month if we've got time, maybe instead of the chewing the cud session. But I think just as just to wrap things up on the pasture survey results, um, we've noticed that as forages mature really throughout the grazing season, our trace mineral concentrations and their availability tended to decline. And also it was possible that our antagonistic factors were increasing. And it just makes it very, very I don't want to say it just really affirms that making consistent, well-designed mineral supplementation on pasture is essential for grazing cattle if we want them to meet their maximum productivity levels. Grazing management does help. If we're rotational grazing and keeping plants in a vegetative state longer, that did tend to have an influence on maintaining mineral concentration as well as just overall quality in terms of protein and energy. So we want to keep our mineral out on pasture consistently. We want to try to improve intake by keeping it fresh, maybe mixing in some salts to kind of play to that natural affinity that they do have for salt. Mineral tubs with covers are great because they help to prevent weathering as well. So I'm gonna flip over water. So sorry, but I promise we will come back to it. I'm going to flip through the chewing the cud. We can table that for next week too. And just want to touch base on what our next month's Stock Talk webinar is going to entail. We're going to have a 2026 cattle market update with Brenna Grant, the Executive Director of CanFax and CanFax Research Services. Looks like now we're going to tack on the results from the water survey. And that will be it. So should you have any questions regarding programming feed and water testing, ration formulation, or any other matters related to beef cattle production, please do not hesitate to contact Manitoba Agriculture, Livestock, and Forage Extension staff that are listed on the screen. Huge thank you to Alison Sass for her presentation on weather. Thanks, Juanita, for standing by for the Chewing the Cud session, which we didn't get to. And to Erin Dieterle and Lori Forbes for their work behind the scenes. Without you, this webinar is not possible. I don't know if we have questions, but thank you for tuning in. And we look forward to seeing you again next month.